When I came to Canada a few years ago, making $100,000 was the benchmark for making it as an immigrant. You could afford housing, save enough for leisure and travels, and pretty much live comfortably. But now that definitely isn't enough. You see, more and more Canadians are struggling. In fact, about 47% of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think there's three main reasons that are causing this. Number one, the decline in real wages. Real wage is a term that is coined by economists, and it simply means the amount of money people make when it's adjusted for inflation. It reflects the true purchasing power of goods and services your income can buy. To make it simple, let's consider an example. Imagine you make $100 a year. Last year with this money, you could afford rent, groceries, car payments, and still have some money left for savings. But this year, as inflation and prices have increased, your rent went up, your groceries are more expensive, but your income remained the same. Now, even though you're still making the same $100 on paper, you can't really buy the same amount of things with that $100 that you could last year. That is, your real wage has declined. And this is what has been happening to Canadians at a scale. Inflation has been beating salary growth by quite a margin. This graph maps out the inflation rate and the growth in Canadian wages at scale. You can clearly see the trend how inflation has been outpacing wage growth for a long time now. And even though while on paper you'll see things are starting to come back to normal, but on the ground level, regular people are still not feeling it. And I think that is because the average wage number that we see in these charts do not account for the income disparity that occurs in different sectors. Like some professions pay more, like tech, healthcare, and those professions are far fewer in numbers. So the number of people who feel strained are far more than who do not, even though the average number is starting to look fine now. Number two, the housing crisis. You've probably heard that we're in a housing crisis at least 100 times by now. It simply refers to the skyrocketing costs of buying or renting a home across major cities in Canada, which is making housing extremely difficult to afford for most people out there. And without getting into too much detail, the cause for that is pretty much due to the imbalance between the supply and demand for housing. You see, as more and more people come into Canada, they want to settle in urban centers like Toronto or Vancouver because good career opportunities are kind of concentrated in those areas. But the number of housing units that are available are super limited, which is causing this difference between supply and demand. And yes, this applies to both renting and buying because a house is a house no matter you buy it or rent it. You see, to help understand the gravity of the situation, let's take a look at this graph. It compares the population growth trend that Canada has seen over the past few years to the new residential construction that's been done. And you can clearly see Canada has consistently added 600,000 new people annually, but the new construction fell behind by quite a lot. The most number of homes we made was in 2022, and that number was only 320,000, which was still 50% short of the people that came in that year. Well, it may seem that the root of the problem is that Canada is admitting more people than it should, but it's not that simple. You see, high interest rates have a huge role to play here, as they've increased the cost of borrowing, making it more expensive for developers to finance new housing projects, which in turn means we're not making as many new houses for people to live in. And while rate hikes were important to control inflation, but they do come with their own side effects, and we're kind of seeing them now. You see, due to this shortage, the average asking rent across all property types has increased by almost 30% in the last 4 years. And the average selling price during the same period has increased by 45%. Well, the amount of money people are making has not grown by nearly as much, which is another major reason that people making $100,000 a year are feeling poor. Number three, financial intelligence. You see, many Canadians and immigrants, despite making enough money, are struggling to manage their money effectively. On average, Canadians are spending more money than they are making. Canada's debt-to-income ratio is about 185%. In simple words, for every $1 that a Canadian is making, they're spending $1.85. And this is just the average. Many people are way beyond this number, which is super scary. According to the study by Fairstone, about 31.2 million Canadians have a credit card, which by the way is not a bad thing, as a credit card can be an effective tool to manage your money wisely. But where the numbers start to look scary is when we see that Canadians spend about $2,300 per month on an average using credit cards and have a $4,200 average monthly balance, which simply is too high. On the other side, an average Canadian is spending about $1,300 every month to own a car. This includes car payments, insurance, gas. And when you compare that with the average income of Canadians, the number could be anywhere from 25% to 35% of their take-home pay, which again is way higher than the 10 to 15% number that many personal financial advisors would recommend you. And that's not it. The trend doesn't just stop there. The number of house poor Canadians is increasing constantly. You see, house poor is a situation where a person spends a large portion of their income on home ownership, leaving only a little left over for other expenses. You see, according to RBC, only 26% of Canadians could affordably buy a single family home currently. And we all know that more Canadians own houses, which clearly shows that Canadians who shouldn't be buying or owning a home are doing so, and that's kind of stretching them out. By the way, this is even more true with Indian immigrants, as home ownership is a sign of making it and showing your peers and friends that you've made it and you're successful, even while they cannot afford a house and shouldn't buy one. A good rule of thumb is that your housing expenses, no matter whether you rent or you buy, shouldn't exceed by 30 to 32% of your gross annual income. You see, the problem lies when people think it as a vehicle to invest and they look at it from that lens versus an expense. You see, a house can be a great asset to invest in, but when you buy it when you can't really afford it, it's definitely a recipe for disaster. You will be 100 times better if you invest in other low return assets while you save up or earn more to afford housing versus just stretching yourself out and buying a home when you really can't afford one. And honestly, this by far is the biggest reason that Indian immigrants making more than $100,000 are not really feeling it anymore. Because as soon as one hits that golden number, they start to look for a house to buy even while they can't afford one, and end up in a worse financial situation which impacts their health and mental wellness. Talking about health, there's a bunch of common mistakes that us Indian immigrants make when we arrive in this country. And I did them too, and chances are you're making the same mistakes too. Click here to see what they are and how you can correct course so you can build a healthier life. I'll see you in the next one.